It's a pleasure to present this project here that started as a theoretical thesis chapter, and as you can see from the title, it became this huge thing. But still, it revolves around a very simple idea. Okay, there's one message, very simple message, which is that the incidence, the design of fiscal policy has substantial influence on the conduct of monetary policy and its redistributive consequences. Okay, so that might not sound outrageous as an outrageous statement, at least to me, but this is not the position that policymakers have tried to promote over the past years. Okay, when they were asked a bit about the redistributive consequences of monetary policies, usually they said that central banks were in charge of managing the aggregate level of the economy, and that the broader government, essentially fiscal policy, was in charge of potentially undoing the undesirable effect of those policies. So here is a quote by Ben Bernanke that is a bit cryptic, but that conveys this message. Mark Carney is probably more straightforward, where he says, yes, whenever I take a decision, it has redistributive consequences, but I can't do much about it. It's not my job. Okay, there is a government with tools, and they can clean whatever I do ex post. Okay, so what I'm going to do in that project is that I'm going to revisit a bit this opinion, and as I said, I'm going to argue that rather than having this strict separation kind of thing, right, where central bank is doing this stuff and the fiscal authority ex post intervenes and corrects the undesirable redistributive consequences, I'm going to argue that some coordination between fiscal and monetary policy can be beneficial. And the way I'm going to build my argument is that I'm going to say that the design of fiscal policy will have an influence on the conduct of monetary policy and its redistributive consequences. Okay? So to illustrate that argument, I'm going to build a very standard textbook model with monetary and fiscal policy in an heterogeneous agent economy. And monetary policy is going to suffer from a standard time inconsistency problem. Okay, so there's going to be an inflation bias. And here I'm going to study how one dimension, one parameter of fiscal policy, essentially the progressivity of labor income tax in this economy, is going to influence and contain the inflation bias and the dispersion of allocation that is induced by monetary discretion. Okay, so that's the message of the project. Okay, so I'm going to quickly mention. Yes, please.
So the inflation bias, are you going to explain that later? Or?
Yes. But in words, the inflation bias is the outcome of discretionary monetary policymakers to generate way more inflation than would be desirable in the economy. Exactly. Okay. So very briefly, I just want to mention a couple of papers that are somehow related to the project I'm doing, so that I can stress how different I am here. It's pretty important. So there is a first paper by Stefania Albanese entitled Inflation and Inequality, where she documents and she explains why inflation could be the outcome of a bargaining process within a population. And a key parameter of explaining inflation outcome is the market income inequality of agents. So here I don't go against that claim, but I say that the incidence of fiscal policy is probably way more important to understand inflation outcome here. Okay? So there's also another paper that is looking at the interaction between progressive taxes and time inconsistency issue, which is a paper by Fari and co-author. And in their environment, progressive fiscal policy helps to curb the willingness of the policymaker to expropriate capital holders and redistribute completely the ownership of capital in the economy. Here in my setup, it's a bit different because I consider explicit monetary and fiscal interactions. But more importantly, I will argue that it's the willingness to redistribute consumption and allocation within the economy that will be pivotal to curb the time inconsistency problem here. Okay, so that might sound a bit cryptic to you if you're not familiar with the paper, so let's just move forward. I just wanted to mention it in case you were familiar with that paper. Okay, and I'll comment about the last trend of literature when I came to the numerical analysis here. So here the organization of the talk here. The first thing I'm going to spend some time on is I'm going to explain in a very toy model, okay, how those how the conduct of monetary policy can be influenced by the design of fiscal policy and by the progressivity of labor income tax. Okay? Then I'm going to present some empirical elements. I'm going to provide some support to the things I've been talking about. And if I'm left with some time, I'll comment on the numerical analysis that I conduct to provide some plausibility of the channel I identify here. Okay? So here is my model. Okay, so the model is a nominal overlapping generation economy where my agents live over two periods. So there's going to be young agents and old agents. Okay, and for the sake of simplicity today, I'm going to present the model as a two-period economy. Okay. So my economy is populated by mass one of agents, heterogeneous agents, and those agents, they differ by their lifetime productivity, which is captured by this parameter Z, which is distributed over this low-high productivity interval. And the program of my agents is pretty basic. They have the following set of preferences. When they work when they're young, they work when they're old, and they consume everything that is left in their pocket when they're old. Okay? So this structure is used because it introduces this motif for savings between young and old age without adding any other form of frictions. Okay? You could think about a cash in advance constraint. You could think about any other thing that would make money valuable in that economy. Here, the structure provides me this motif for holding money in the economy. Okay? So when they're young, my agent, they work and they save. There is one asset in my economy. This is money here. So this is the real quantity of money. And when they're old, they also work. Their labor income is taxed. Okay? I will come back on this tax function form that I use here that will capture the progressivity of labor income tax. And they also consume their money holding net of the inflation tax. Okay? So that the monetary fiscal interactions that I have mentioned before, they're going to be captured by this budget constraint, okay, for the government. The government at t equal 2 has to raise an amount of taxes to finance a public good, and this public good is going to be financed with labor income tax and an inflation tax here. Yes, please?
The productivity shock is the same both periods. It's just for the sake of simplicity?
Yeah, no, so in the analytical model here, I'm going to keep that assumption that there is this lifetime heterogeneity, and that's the purpose of the numerical analysis, is to introduce some productivity shock over the life cycle. Okay?
But is it crucial that it is the same in both periods?
So for the analytical analysis, yes, because I will study policy choices in political economy, and I want my agents to vote, so I just want one. That's the reason here. Okay? So let's have a look at this tax schedule here. Yeah, at this progressive tax schedule. Okay, so I have the following isoelastic function, where given labor income y, well, the tax bill is computed with two parameters, one parameter lambda, which will give you the level of labor taxes, and one parameter alpha, which we capture the progressivity of labor income tax. And the progressivity usually is defined as the ratio of marginal tax rate to average tax rate. And here in my case, this is given by my parameter alpha. So if alpha is equal to 0, I have proportional taxes, as we are used in those models. And when alpha increases, well, my income tax schedule is more and more progressive. Okay? So there is one important hypothesis that I will justify later on with those empirical elements that I mentioned before, is that my progressivity, the progressivity parameter of my labor income tax, okay, is subject to some inertia. Okay, you need to define it at least one period in advance. Okay, there is this idea that you cannot contemporaneously adjust the progressivity of labor income tax. The little story is that if you want to adjust the level of labor of taxes, it's pretty easy. But if you want to change the whole tax code and redistribute the incidence of fiscal policy, it takes a bit more time. Okay? So the institution that I'm going to use as a way to curb the inflation tax is going to be precisely this parameter alpha here in my economy.
Why people don't pay taxes when they're young?
Sorry?
Why why do they don't pay tax if they are young?
Okay.
That would generate a lot of intertemporal.
Sure. So that's a fair question, right? The model is here to build the argument that somehow fiscal policy operates within period and that monetary policy has an intertemporal dimension, okay? So all labor income is taxed in one way or the other, okay? So young age labor income is taxed with monetary policy through savings, and old age labor income is taxed through fiscal policy, okay? That's a construction. It's not for plausibility, I agree. Yes?
Just in terms of interpretation of the model, no? In terms of interpretation of your model, you say this is money.
Yes, I do.
If this is government debt and this is a tax on whatever is government debt, or
Yeah,
return,
a nominal
it
asset.
be the same or not?
A nominal asset, you mean? So
Well, it could be also real as long as you could tax the real returns on government debt. So I'm asking, I'm not.
okay.
Yeah.
So again, for the sake of the analysis here, I consider that there is this money asset. Could there be potential substitution with a nominal asset? Yes, because what will matter eventually is the exposure of my agents in the economy to different form of taxation.
Yeah.
Okay, so that could be the same.
In that sense, I mean, you interpret everything is the interaction between monetary and fiscal policy.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me about the question whether I want to use labor income taxes that are progressive instead of using another tax that is the tax on assets or that is the
Sure.
that you call it.
Sure, you could rewrite it this way. Yeah. One thing that I impose and that make it relevant in the context of monetary and fiscal policy here is that I cannot tailor the tax on the nominal asset to specific agents. Okay, so monetary policy, if you have money in your pocket, will tax everybody proportionally. Whereas here, with fiscal policy, I can tailor way more how I affect the holdings of people.
By construction, here only the old people can be taxed with inflation tax.
Yes, true. That's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
There are unproductive and productive old. You
No,
can't
yeah.
distinguish the tax based on that.
No,
Yeah.
This is a progressive tax.
So, wait. Think about a population, right, where you have labor income and you have nominal assets. Okay, and you have a distribution, and it's a static choice, and you can use monetary policy. In that case, you will tax nominal asset holders, or you can use fiscal policy, and in that case, you would tax workers. Okay, that's.
But typically, like rich people hold a lot of real assets.
Yes.
Nominal assets.
Yes.
So in this sense, the poor people
Yeah.
are taxed by inflation tax.
I agree. So if I have a point in my conclusion. That's the very last point here, and I'm going to argue when I'm going to discuss the choice of agents that if the rich agents were to hold real assets that would be immune to inflation, okay, this would not change the result at all. This would reinforce the result that I'm going to present. I'm going to point that when I'm going to talk about this in the model. Okay. Okay, so the whole idea of the paper is to look at how policy instruments are being chosen in this environment. And so I'm going to contrast two choice mechanisms. One first is going to be the choice mechanism, is going to be the choice of policy instrument of a planner. And my planner will have no distributive concern because of the assumptions of linear utility in consumption here. Okay? And to show how progressive fiscal policy can only curb the inflation bias if you have a concern for redistribution, I'm going to analyze those choices in a political economy that will highlight the conflicts of our policy choices here. Okay? This is going to be probably less transparent in a second. So let's first look at the choices of a planner. Okay? So we have a standard tax problem, and so under commitment, the objective is to smooth taxes over time and over the population. So here the choice of the planner would be to set a level of inflation tax and a level of labor tax that are equivalent, okay, with no progressivity. Why? Because progressive labor taxes are distortionary per se. Okay? Now I'm going to define what is the inflation bias. Whenever my policymaker lack this commitment technology, Okay? They will have to make choices given the distribution of money holding of my agents in the economy. And in that case, since money demand is no longer elastic at that stage, policymaker will choose to set the inflation rate as high as possible, okay? Because this is non-distortionary in that case. And this will generate welfare losses because my agents will anticipate the conduct of policy here.
Is that to say no concern for redistribution? What are
Yes.
policymakers' objectives?
So in the objective function here is to maximize the utilitarian welfare of my population here.
But then I care about distributional consequences. People are heterogeneous.
Yeah, people are heterogeneous, but here in that case, there is linear utility in consumption. So what you want is you want to
But I care about N also.
Yeah, I care about N and I want to minimize the distortion over all my population, but I don't care which N is affected here. So what I want is that I want to minimize distortion, but I'm not interested in the distribution of consumption.
You're just interested in the distribution of N.
Yeah, of course I am, yes. That's why I want to equalize distortions over time and over all my population.
That is a form of redistribution now.
Well, everybody is being affected by taxes up to their productivity level. That's for sure.
No. I'm just saying, if you write down a model and the planner adds up everybody's utility, that is a utilitarian planner.
Yes.
If there are curvature in
Yeah.
any term, you're introducing concerns for redistribution.
Yes. So let me give you a mathematical argument here. When you write the program of the planner here, let's say the average of the utility of over Z over all my agents, this collapses to the choices over a representative agent economy where my agent has the mean level of productivity. So you don't.
It's not the linearity. I suspect it's quadratic.
The quadratic may play a role. Yeah, I should do the algebra with some more general thing. I agree with you. That may play a role.
But
Yes.
If you tax the income of the young,
Yes.
and you add altruism,
Ye-
then perhaps the result doesn't go anymore.
Yeah, sure. But you know, in that case, I'm moving a bit away from my focus if I had those features here. Okay. I just want to make a simple point here.
The result is very particular to
No, I claim that it's highly general. And I'm trying to convince you here. Yes.
So just to go back to my question about inflation bias, I mean, that does not, the argument you sketched had nothing to do with there being different types in the population. It's just that exposed.
No, exactly. Yeah. So it's a standard inflation bias, as in the standard textbook case. Yeah. There's nothing special about the heterogeneity here.
But
Yeah.
to follow up, like if you go forward,
Yeah.
it's not obvious that this alpha should be 0. It's not obvious to me at least.
It's the outcome of the algebra and of the tax program. Yes. Why? Because the progressive labor taxes are known in all the.
But you might want them regressive so that you make the unproductive guys not to work.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I should have commented on that. So I don't consider the case where labor income tax are regressive because they will not arise as a choice in my environment. But if you were the planner here, you would set alpha equal -1 for a very good reason, which is that in that case you would have lump sum taxes, which would be non-distortionary. Okay, I agree. So there is an implicit constraint. So in the next section, I'm going to keep the feature of discretionary policymaker, but rather than looking at the choice of tax instrument under a planner, I'm going to look at political economy setup. Okay, and this political economy setup is going to help us to understand potential distributional conflicts. Okay, over policy choices in that economy. Okay, so here is the political protocol. So at t equal 2, okay, remember that progressivity is subject to tax inertia, so progressivity is given at t equal 2. My agents in the economy, they're going to vote over labor income tax against the inflation tax, okay? So I want to understand at that stage whether progressive labor income tax generates some conflicts over those policy choices here.
So just to understand, there's the public spending, which
Yeah.
is to be financed.
Yes.
Capital G, that does not depend on the realization of the shock. That's why you need to adjust taxes, distorting taxes after the shock.
After the shock, you mean after the...
After the realization of the
So Z is permanent here for my agents. Yeah.
But public spending does not depend.
Does not depend, no. And so at t equal 1, anticipating the outcome of the vote, will ask my agent in the economy, okay, do you want to have some progressive labor income tax here? Okay. And here, the key message is that progressivity will provide those dynamic incentives that will discipline my monetary authority into generating excessive inflation. That's my message. So let me walk through the analysis in graphical terms. Okay, it's going to be way more transparent for everybody. So on this graph here, on the horizontal axis, I have my population ordered by productivity level. These are my low productivity guys, my high productivity guys. And here on the vertical axis, you have their choice, their bliss policy for lambda. Okay, namely that if they want a very high lambda here, it means that they don't want inflation. Okay, because there's a budget constraint. So the first thing I want to point is that if there is no progressive labor income tax, they all want to rely on the inflation tax to finance the public good. Now, whenever I drop a positive amount of progressivity here in my economy, I have distributional conflicts that arise. Okay, so it's very intuitive, but my low productivity agents, okay, they will favor high level of labor taxes. Why? Because they will use this to shift the burden of taxation on higher productivity agents, and they will limit the effect of inflation on their money holdings. Okay, that's what they do. Now, my highly productive agents, naturally, they have the opposite preferences, and they want to rely essentially on a policy mix that is biased towards monetary policy. Okay, so there is this individual trade-off between this tax shifting effect and the individual distortionary cost of labor taxation. Okay, so the nice feature of the model, that's the beauty of Jensen inequality, is that my median voter here in that economy, for any positive level of labor taxes, he wants, for any positive level of progressivity, he wants to raise a positive amount of progressivity of labor taxes. Okay, which means that in that case, through the conflicts in my economy, any positive level of progressive income tax will mitigate the inflation bias. Okay, so now I want to understand how the outcome of the vote depends on this level of progressivity. So as I argued before, when there's no progressivity, my median voter will pick a policy mix with no labor taxes and a lot of inflation, whereas as progressivity increases, it will implement a policy mix which will rebalance resources away from the inflation tax towards labor income tax. Okay, and at some point, well, progressivity is costly. So if progressivity gets very, very high, you want to decrease the amount of labor taxes that you collect. Okay, so that's the outcome of the vote here. Now, I want to ask my agents in period 1, okay, all those agents that are very differently exposed to the policy mix when they hold, but I want to ask those guys in period 1 whether they want to live in a world with progressive labor income tax or not, okay? And here is the outcome of their favorite level of progressive labor income tax, okay? So my young agents here, my low productivity agents, they will favor a level of progressivity here that will maximize the amount of labor taxes. Why? Because in effect, when productivity level is very low, you never pay labor income tax if it's progressive. Now, my agents here, as productivity increases, they will ask a higher level of progressivity because this will induce more tax shifting. Okay, they want to push the burden of taxation on other agents. And then at some point, this will drop, okay, because those guys here, they anticipate that they will have to suffer from distortions. And in that case, they want to reduce the level of progressivity only to the point where they value those dynamic incentives, just the slight reduction in inflation that can be induced by progressive labor income tax. So the key result of the analysis is that despite heterogeneous exposure to those policy instruments, my young agents, they unanimously favor a positive level of progressive income tax in that economy. Why? Because it does provide those dynamic incentives of reducing the inflation bias. Now, they don't have the same policy because they expose the same bliss policy because they expose differently to the policy mix, but at least they all value the dynamic incentives that are provided by progressive income tax here.
So the alpha is not going to be determined as an outcome of the political economy thing like the other?
No, so here the thing I want to stress is that because everybody has a Bliss policy with strictly positive level of progressivity, whatever the choice mechanism that you set, that you choose, that respects a bit this, you will have a positive level of progressivity. Okay.
Why not do everything together? Why not have the agents get together and figure out lambda, alpha, and phi?
In period 1?
I mean, there's no information between period 1 and period 0, period 2, no?
Sure. I understand why you use the word information here. So the message here is that I cannot discipline policymakers. Okay, they make choice sequentially under discretion, but I can use that institution that takes time to change to curb it. That's the message of the paper. If they were to choose in period 1 here, well, they would vote for the program of the planner. No progressivity and balanced policy mix between those two things. But here, unfortunately, you cannot tie the hand of those central bankers because they do whatever they want from one period to the other.
I still don't get this is the 2-period OLG?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So how do you vote? Like every period people vote.
So every period, the old agents vote given the progressivity of labor income tax and their nominal money holdings. In a sense, everything is contained within a generation by construction. And so I report in the OLG, here I report the stationary outcome so that I can collapse my OLG economy into a 2-period model without some substantial dynamics.
So when they vote, it doesn't impact into the youngsters?
No, it has no impact on the young because of the stationary equilibrium. That's an important thing. But when the only thing that
Stationary equilibrium. What's the state variable in this model?
So the state, sure. The state variable in old age is the progressivity of labor income tax and the distribution of money holding in the economy.
And that's different potentially for the young and the old in any period. What I'm trying to say is, why doesn't this problem separate completely?
Oh, it's almost no.
It has nothing to do with
Okay.
stationarity.
So wait. Inflation is a function of money supply and money demand. Okay. Formally in my model, why do I use that stationarity? Because I want those two things to cancel out. Inflation in my.
It's all homogeneous at degree 1 in money. So I don't understand the state. There's no state variable in this economy. If you consider a different economy with twice the quantity of money, the continuation equilibrium is going to be completely unaffected. So what is the dynamics?
Oh, this is the point that I made before. The whole structure is based so that there's no dynamics. Okay, but still.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
You keep saying that. And then you say, oh, but I look at stationary equilibrium.
Yes, and I need to do that.
Stationary equilibrium as opposed to any ordinary equilibrium.
And I need
there are no dynamics, they coincide.
And I need to do that, and I might do a mistake here, okay, but this is aggregate money holding, and this is expected inflation, okay?
Yeah, and the point I'm trying to make is that thing there is homogeneous in M.
Sure, but that's my young, and that's a state variable, so I need to make sure that those things are.
I think what he means, Chari, is that like tomorrow's inflation. So suppose I'm considering what's happening to the old today, right? And the old are going to choose some inflation. What tomorrow's happens tomorrow is going to affect outcomes today through the young's labor supply.
That's the part that's confusing me.
Sure, but
suppose I chose twice as much quantity of money. That just raises the price level today and the price level tomorrow.
So that's a point that is about the algebra. That's not the core message. I'm very happy to talk about it.
Monetary economies normally there's no real state variable. You only have money. That's what confuses me.
Okay.
I'm very sympathetic to the idea that there are no dynamics.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll be happy to have that conversation. Okay.
So either there are dynamics, which I don't understand, or there are no dynamics, in which case it's just equilibrium.
So I suggest that we talk about the dynamics of inflation expectations later. But that's fine. Okay. So what's the key message? Progressive fiscal policy is costly. It generates some redistributive conflicts that influence the monetary policy mix, and it contributes to curb the inflation bias. And the important result is that it's desirable to live in an economy if you want to curb the inflation bias because it provides those dynamics incentives. Yes, thank you.
One last question.
Sure.
So it's not really the progressivity, but really the fact that it's chosen in advance.
Yes, it's like the conservative central banker.
Just the symmetry. Suppose you flip that and said, we decide lambda in advance, and
Yeah.
alpha is determined ex post.
If you decide lambda in advance, well, you would then after you want to motivate that hypothesis that I use in the paper. And second, I want just to investigate if in the data I have a relationship between this progressivity and the inflation outcome. Okay. So when international organizations, they want to study the effect of fiscal policy on inequality, usually the exercise they do is that they consider two indices for income dispersion, one the market income, one the income net of transfer of taxes. Okay? So these are the data for the US. Well, we have an upcoming trend of inequality, this is known to us. But the interesting thing is that when you take the percentage reduction between those things, I think it's visually convincing. Well, overall, the structure, the redistributive structure of fiscal policy is kind of constant over time in the US. Okay? Can do the same exercise for different countries. So here I plot Sweden, the Philippines, and the United States. Okay, this is in line a bit with our understanding of the redistributive structure of those countries. The Swedes, they redistribute a lot. In the Philippines, they don't redistribute that much. But overall, it's here. That's a percentage point in reduction between Gini, the market income Gini, and the net income Gini. Okay, yeah.
And are you saying that this is a one-to-one mapping to your?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that here in that thing you have two things. You have progressive labor income tax and lump sum transfers and social transfers. That's why I'm doing a numerical analysis later on to make sure that that works. Okay? So a more systematic piece of evidence is that I have a panel data set of a lot of countries, okay, over a large period, 75 to 2015. And what I do is that I do simple country fixed effect regression here. And I want to report the adjusted R-square for those regressions, try to understand whether this pattern, like this constant redistributive structure of fiscal policy is present in those countries. Okay, and I want to contrast that to the Gini coefficient for market income for similar types of regressions. And I argue that given the very high adjusted R-square that I get with simple country fixed effect regressions, there is a substantial inertia in the structure of fiscal.
No, that's not right. We're measuring inertia. No,
So let me understand, just go back to that picture. So the view you have of the world is these economies are actually getting hit with all kinds of shocks.
Mm-hmm.
And despite that, the fact that we see that dashed or dotted line flat is what you are interpreting.
Is that like, my...
Look, here's the problem with this view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
When a really severe shock hit in the United States,
Right.
in 2008 and 2009. How long do you think it took for Congress to pass a tax bill? I'll tell you the answer. Because I don't want you to guess. 1 week. Literally 1 week.
And
January 27th, they were done with the tax bill. It was on the president's desk.
Okay.
So when a big enough shock happens, then the notion that fiscal policy does not react. Now that we've got lots of data, we know that that's a silly point of view. So it took less time for them to react than it does for the stupid FOMC. Those idiots.
I don't contest.
A week to get their act together. It took 535 guys 1 week to get their stuff together. The more general point is, what you are saying is something about the responsiveness to shocks and the importance of those kinds of things, without independently measuring those shocks. Without independently saying that those shocks would have induced a bigger change in your model. The fact that it's flat in the data tells me nothing about how sticky it is.
Okay, so
it's like saying prices are sticky when the inflation rate is 0. And you say, why? That tells me prices are sticky. No, it doesn't. It tells you the inflation rate is 0. That's the problem.
So regarding the last part of your sentence, I fully agree with you. Indeed, that argument is pretty strong. Regarding the first part, I don't say that fiscal policies, that the Congress is not able to vote within a week, a strong package, but I say that changing the whole tax code would take more than a week.
The whole freaking tax code in a week. It was a $1.6 trillion package.
But that's a level effect.
They changed the progressive.
Okay.
They changed Social Security taxes. They changed rebates to states. They changed all kinds of rules. The notion that it didn't affect progressivity is just, it's not true.
Okay, so given that fact, I will think more about
So
this.
a stark example is what they do with unemployment benefits. They keep kind of changing extending that. That stuff that happens very, very frequently. So maybe one way to deal with it, rather than go all the way to Charlie's mentioning about like showing us what the shock should do, you could show us the other two instruments in your, that you're interested in, the level of the tax rate and pi. So for your claim, those should be really volatile relative to this.
Sure. I have a hard time to summarize the stance of monetary policy into one single variable, but I understand your point.
That would be like, if you don't know the shock,
sure.
those things somehow seem to be more responsive.
Okay.
You may be convinced of that.
Okay, so based on the shortcomings of that measures, okay, let me try to argue that that measure is 10 minutes, okay. Let me argue that that measure is somehow related to inflation outcome, okay? So let's assume that that measure captures something, okay? So one exercise that was suggested to me was to contrast the index of redistribution of countries to the difference between the average inflation, broadly speaking, in the 60s and the average inflation in the 70s for Western European countries. Okay, the rationale behind this exercise is that you have a set of countries that might be, broadly speaking, homogeneous. I agree that's a strong statement. And I want to understand whether their redistributive structure influenced their reactions to external shocks. Okay? So the outcome of this exercise is that there is a negative relationship, okay? There's substantial noise, but there's a negative relationship here, okay? The second exercise that I do is that I consider my whole set of countries that I presented before, okay? All countries in the world and my OECD countries. And I want to investigate whether there is a correlation between that index of fiscal redistribution and the inflation tax, which is a transformation of inflation level to try to mitigate those extreme values, okay? And what I observe is that there is indeed a negative correlation, and that negative correlation is present both for all my data, all my countries.
There's an enormous heteroscedasticity.
So here.
I'm sure, I mean, if you take care of the heteroscedasticity, I would doubt very much that that's of significant.
Okay, so I don't want to make a point about the significance here, okay? This is not something I want to make a big point. I want to make a point about the negative correlation.
But typically the country which can do the redistribution, the government is kind of competent, or they can tax the people.
Yes.
So the country who is messed up,
yes.
they cannot tax.
Yes.
Like during the war or something, then inflation has to be high.
Yes.
So you are looking at this the competence or the power to tax.
Yeah.
Versus inflation.
I want to be fully honest with you. I don't claim full causality when I do those exercises here. Okay, I just want to look a bit naively whether there is a correlation in the data with respect to those things here. Okay.
It looks to me the stronger relationship is about the power to tax.
Yes. The fiscal capacity. The fiscal capacity. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. Okay. So I have 5 minutes? Yeah. Okay. So let me just explain briefly what I do in the numerical analysis here. Okay. I want to address a couple of points that have been raised before. So essentially, this is a problem of tax distortions, right? And what is critical in a problem of tax distortion is the behavioral response of agents. So I want to plug my mechanism into an environment that has plausible preference specifications, okay, which is essentially a standard incomplete market economy. And I want to see whether the dynamic incentives that I've identified in the toy model, they would resist and they would still be valuable in an environment where progressive income tax would affect several margins in the economy, okay? And those margins have been identified as the distortions that they naturally provide, their capacity to redistribute consumption within the economy, and the insurance that they provide against idiosyncratic shocks, okay? So to cast light on this, I do a couple of sensitivity exercise, but the message is the following, is that on top of generating that inflation bias, okay, monetary discretion generates a lot of dispersions, a lot of undesirable redistributive consequences, and my progressive labor income tax addresses both. Okay? But what I want to stress is that what's really important is that my policymaker is concerned with the redistribution, otherwise it doesn't work that much. Okay? So I take the exact same model that I presented before, okay, with all its shortcomings, and I had the following features. The first one is that agents, their productivity shocks evolves over their life cycle with this parameter sigma square here that will parameterize market income inequality. 5 minutes.
But we're still in a two-period OG framework?
We're still in a two-period OG framework, yeah. So I'm really interested about the effect of the preferences here, okay? Because this will really pin down the behavioral response of my agents. And so I parameterize my preference by just adding curvature in consumption and the standard utility of labor, which is captured by the Frisch elasticity and this parameter that captured the labor dimension, okay? My government budget constraint is the same as before, okay? Inflation tax, labor income tax, and following your remark, I also had a lump sum transfers, which is presumably an important element of fiscal redistribution, okay? And the welfare objective is one of a planner, which given the progressivity of labor income tax and the distribution of money holding, picks between those level parameters, okay, picks the policy mix, okay? So let me briefly comment about the calibration. It's pretty standard. What I try to do is that I take those papers about progressive fiscal policy.
You don't want to take, this is a two-period OG model.
Yeah, I know where you're going. You're
All of this stuff.
I know where you're going. I know where you're going. I know. So I don't want to make a big point about. This. Again, what has really some importance to me are the parameters, the parameters that captured my behavioral response, namely those that captured the response of labor supply. Okay. So there's some parameters that I calibrate within the model to try to match some of the US statistics about income distribution. Okay, we know that within such a simplistic model, it's very hard to match all those parameters, but still I do manage, broadly speaking, to match the relative redistribution in the economy.
So what is the period in your model?
Yes, so that was the point that was raised on my right here.
You cannot do this.
Yeah, okay. I cannot.
You cannot compute it.
No, he can do whatever he wants.
Thank you.
You pay attention or not, that's for you.
Yeah. So, okay, let me comment on beta. You have a problem with beta, right? With this.
With everything, I think. You cannot calculate a Gini coefficient based on annual income because if you do it over 25 years, that's going to look different, right? Because people's incomes may be smoothed out over time, whatever. Right?
So what I want to generate here is a non-trivial distribution of labor income and nominal wealth, okay? And I don't take my figures at face value. I want to verify that my mechanism works in an environment where, let's say, the preference specification is one that is usually used in the literature, okay? I don't claim here that I'm going to provide numerical prediction for this, okay? So here is how I beat my argument. Okay, so I will contrast different policy regimes. Okay, naturally the benchmark is the one under commitment. Okay, and I will contrast it with the performance of the economy under discretion for different values of progressive labor income tax. So I do a normalization. So this is the benchmark. I want to contrast the performance of my economy under discretion to the case of commitment without progressivity, okay? Just to capture the capacity of progressive labor income tax to reduce the inflation bias. So I normalize lifetime welfare and the dispersion of welfare to 1 here in this case. And what those figures show is that if I have no progressivity under discretion, I will have a huge welfare loss, okay, which is driven by the inflation bias and also by the dispersion in welfare and allocation in my economy. When in contrast, when I use the parameter of progressivity that I have calibrated before, well, I reach a level of welfare and of dispersion that is qualitatively similar to the one that I will reach under commitment. Okay, so that's the purpose of the numerical exercise here. Okay, it's to produce those elements.
It's also clear how to match those alphas to the alphas in this data.
Yeah. So
Super high
what?
compared to the ones in the data.
No. So wait. I wanted to comment on something that I overlooked here very briefly. Alpha here is the parameter of my tax function. And how do I discipline it? I use this measure of effective progressivity, which is not exactly alpha, which is alpha plus the lump sum transfer plus the behavioral response of agents. Because when you measure progressive taxes in the data, you need to take all those things into account. Okay, so that's the way I derive my alpha, is by disciplining it against the empirical progressivity in the data. Alpha is just a parameter in my model. It has no counterpart in the data, I think. Okay, except through this transformation here.
But there are people who estimate directly from the data.
No.
As a paper in Restart, but you have a function for.
They estimate it. I would like to show you how they do this. Yeah. They estimate it from the data. Okay, I'm left with time here. Yes, that's 0. Okay, so let me skip completely this very interesting analysis here that casts light on a lot of the mechanism here, and let me conclude. Well, the conclusion of that paper is that when we think about the conduct of monetary policy and its redistributive consequences, we might integrate into the debate the structure of fiscal policy. Okay, because it does really help to improve the policy mix. And to address your question, I'm sorry I skipped it, but if my rich agents were able to save with real assets, okay, they would be really in favor of inflation because their nominal money holdings, their asset holdings would be immune to inflation. Okay, that's what I skipped, but that's my last point here, as I said. Okay, thank you very much.